This is the Read, Write, and Create podcast, the podcast where you get a bite-sized session of creative writing coaching from me, Lori L. Tharps. I'm a storytelling evangelist who moved to the south of Spain so I could live a global literary life. I'm also an award-winning author of both fiction and nonfiction, a journalist, and a former college professor. I created this podcast because I want to help as many BIPOC writers as possible get their stories out of their heads and into the world. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, wordsmiths, storytellers, and scribes. On episode 47 of the podcast, I am so excited to share my conversation with Rebecca Carroll. Rebecca's new book, I Know What the Red Clay Looks Like, The Voice and Vision of Black Women Writers, was just released on December 3rd, 2024. Rebecca is a writer, cultural critic, and host of the podcasts Come Through with Rebecca Carroll and the award-winning Billy Was a Black Woman. Her critically acclaimed memoir, Surviving the White Gaze, was called, quote, gorgeous and powerful by the New York Times Book Review. During our conversation, Rebecca shares why she prefers the word storyteller to writer. She offers advice on writing difficult memoirs with compassion, and we talk about the power of Black women's stories. Of course, then we dig into the incredible work that is I Know What the Red Clay Looks Like. This is a book that is a collection of interviews with famous Black women writers, including June Jordan, Pearl Cleage, Rita Dove, and Lorraine Carey, just to name a few. During our conversation, we talk about how Rebecca wrote that book as a young 20-something just out of college, and then how she got the book reissued 30 years later with young authors like Safiya Sinclair adding their voices to the collection. This is yet another inspiring conversation with a thoughtful and innovative storyteller. I know you are going to love it. Now, just so you know, you should listen all the way to the end of the episode so you can find out how you can win a free copy of I Know What the Red Clay Looks Like. All right, let's get into the conversation. Welcome to the Read, Write, and Create podcast, Rebecca Carroll.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Well, I am super delighted that you're here. And I always like to start by telling people why I have invited different authors on the show, like what was the inciting incident, if you will. And so I really was going to just end this season of the podcast with like, this is what I'm doing for the holidays. Everybody have a good time and we'll be on our way. And then I found out that your book, I Know What the Red Clay Looks Like, was being reissued and was going to kind of hit at the same time that the season was ending. And I thought, well, I have to get Rebecca on the podcast because I think the stories of these Black women writers are the perfect way for my listeners to finish out their year as well, is to reflect on, read, be inspired by some of our favorite writers and literary ancestors, which we talk a lot about on this podcast, especially because some of the writers in the book have since become literary ancestors since the book has been released. So what I wanted to do was have you on and share the story of how you got to sit down and speak to some of these incredible writers. And then even more importantly, how you got the book reissued 30 years later, because we all know to get a book reissued, that's a feat in and of itself. So that's why you're here. That's why I hope everybody's excited to hear this story of this incredible book. But before we get to that, I want to talk about your writing life in general. So I always like to start by asking authors, how did you fall in love with writing? And what were your writing dreams? Like, what did you think writing was going to be in your life?
I have always written, but I've mostly loved storytelling. So I didn't think about being a writer so much as I thought about ways in which to tell a story. You know, I put on plays when I was little, some very boring, but also like I always just loved the idea of telling a story. And I think that that is also the most human thing that we do is storytelling in terms of history right up until today. That's what connects us is storytelling. And so, as you know, as a writer, being a writer doesn't mean just writing. And I didn't realize that until I started to sort of formally write, because I always kept a journal, from when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. And so when it came to writing my memoir years and years later, it was great because I had all of these literally volumes and volumes of journals. But that was writing, but it wasn't being a writer. And so it probably wasn't until, when I was in high school and college, teachers would say, you're very good with words. But I didn't think of myself as a writer until I talked with these women. And remember, the first book came out when I was 24 years old. And so I interviewed these women when I was like 22 and 23. And I had reached out to them both because I had this idea of becoming a writer, but also because, as a Black transracial adoptee, I was looking for Black women to sort of join me in solidifying my identity as a Black woman. Because Black women, we know, we have identity on lock and we show up for each other. And so it was sort of this beautiful coalescence of discovering that I wanted to be a writer with finding the community of Black women and Black women writers to help me do that.
That's incredible. What a wonderful kind of baptism into this world of writing. I mean, it's stunning. And we're going to dive into the creation or the origin story of the book, but we're going to go forward and then go backwards. What did you study as an undergrad? And did you get an MFA? Did you go to journalism school? I know your work, I think, maybe falls into the category of journalist. So what kind of training did you do? And I ask this with the idea that there are people listening who still need to know, do I need to get this degree? Or, what path did you take to start your education as a writer?
Nonlinear, I would say. But I'm also so glad you asked that, because I went through a period of my career feeling very imposter syndrome-y about not having gone to journalism school. I went to UNH first for 3 semesters because it was a state school. We didn't have any money. I got scholarships. And I studied political science and journalism. And I didn't like the rigidity of either of them because, again, I'm a storyteller, but I also consider myself an artist. And I don't want to sound arrogant. A lot of people go around calling themselves artists, but that is, I'm a collagist. I think in sort of pieces and fitting things together. And so Hampshire College was absolutely perfect for that because I transferred there. And I was reluctant because I had read about it in the New York Times as being like this hippie frisbee playing school. But I went for the interview and I actually talked with a Black woman who worked there, and she was very candid with me. And I said, I don't want to feel like an only, but this is what I want to do. And she said, you will feel like an only from time to time, but if this is what you want to do, this is where you should be. And so I got to decide how to put my storytelling to work and also take journalism classes and criticism classes, because I think more than journalism, I think of myself as a cultural critic. But that was absolutely the best place for me to piece together in a sort of collagist way how I wanted to learn and how I wanted to tell stories.
We have so much in common. Everything you're saying, you're being a lot more eloquent than I would describe myself, but I started out writing plays as a child and making my cousins be a part of them. I started doing collage formally, taking classes in this late stage in my life. I like the way you put that's how you see yourself as storytellers, putting pieces together. If I had any sewing abilities, I would love to do patchwork quilts, because what I see is taking these material pieces that are imbued with meaning and creating a new thing. So
exactly that. I'm struck also in terms of talking about red clay and the narratives within. The artist Bisa Butler refers to her fabric work as portrait quilts. And I think of these narratives as portrait narratives, wherein the stories and the portraits are sewn together with words.
I love that. I'm a huge Bisa Butler fan. She liked something that I posted online once, and I practically like had a heart attack. I was like, oh my God. Anyway, moving on. So, you mentioned that you're, journalist, but more storyteller. How do you describe your career today, and what is it made up of? What kind of stories are you telling, and what medium are you working in right now?
I'm working in all of the mediums. And again, that speaks very clearly to my collagist sort of vision. I have hosted a couple of podcasts. I have done many, 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 many live events and series. When I was at WNYC, I launched several live event and audio series and specials. I was a columnist for The Guardian, opinion columnist, and a critic at large for the LA Times. Since the memoir came out and I left WNYC, because the memoir was optioned for TV. And so I worked for a year trying to put that together. And then I had another TV pilot idea that I worked on. I did that whole thing where journalists were sort of moving into the TV world, and it was kind of brutal. I found it really, really demeaning and wild and weird and dishonest, which will, I'm sure, prevent me from working in Hollywood ever again. But so I spent 2 years like really focused on pitching these two projects, and then the strike happened. And after the writer's strike, I'm sure if you have anybody else in your world in that business, particularly folks of color, Black folks, none of our projects came back to the table after the writer's strike. So that was like a whole 2-year period of sort of moving into and investing in that medium, which I don't regret. I actually quite enjoyed the pitch prospect, the scripting. I love scripting. That was really exciting. But then I also co-founded this media collective, The Meteor, which is, sort of a collection of storytellers and creatives and journalists and filmmakers who use storytelling as a way to create race and gender equality. And through that collective, I launched In Love and Struggle, which is this live and audio event that centers the lived experiences of Black women and non-binary people in partnership with Audible. So we did 3 seasons of that I scripted and curated, executive produced. And so that sort of takes us right up until now, because with the last In Love and Struggle, I guess it will be almost a year ago now, but that featured Cree Summer, perhaps best known from A Different World, but also a brilliant voice-over actress, among other things, singer-songwriter. So she was sort of the centerpiece of that last In Love and Struggle, but it also featured Nona Hendricks, which was amazing, multi-generational cast, Adrienne Marie Brown. And so Audible decided to discontinue their support of that for whatever reason. I think Audible is a behemoth and they do what they do. And so that makes me a little sad. But in the time, I only learned of that this summer. So in the time since I heard of that, I've been trying to sort of regenerate ideas for how to continue it in different ways. I mean, this book, the re-release is so connected to In Love and Struggle. And In Love and Struggle was so connected to the podcast I did about Billie Holiday. Billie was a Black woman. So I'm working in whatever medium calls, but it's always centered around storytelling. And if I get a chance to write something that feels really good and that feels really interesting, then I want to do it. But, after the election, how many people invited me to write something? And I'm just tapped, and that's the other thing. After being an opinion writer and a cultural critic, it's really hard to come up with original things to say, particularly about things that everybody is talking about. I really burnt out. It was useful. It was extremely useful because in the time that I was an opinion writer at The Guardian coincided with Ferguson and just the onslaught, for lack of a better word, of all of these killings of young Black men. And I was raising a Black boy, and it hit something for me that was so furious and so visceral and so clear. And these sort of missives that I would write felt like they were meaningful in a way that was going to build to something else. And that, I feel, is what prefaced the memoir. But now, to try to figure out a way to say something original while also trying to keep apathy at bay and cynicism at bay. I mean, that's the work I have to do. I have to focus on being a free Black woman, raising a free Black boy. And that's my focus. So, this book is coming out, and then I have a sort of vague idea for another book. But I'm really very open at the moment, and I'm open to what comes my way. It feels, like that whole big next chapter energy. You said at my age earlier, you referenced your age, and, we are of a certain age, and things feel different in terms of career work and, what the expectations of success are and how you gauge that and how you place yourself in among all these other folks who are hustling and doing great stuff and who you want to support, but you also want to be seen. And social media has turned that into an absolute shit show, where we have this disconnect of like, I don't shine unless everybody shines. But wait, if that person shines, then how am I going to shine? It's this absolute contradiction in terms. And that's where we are with media. And I have been centered very squarely in media for 20 years now in various capacities. And so it's an interesting time, it's also the TikToks and the videos and I don't have it. Right. I mean,
I understand. Like, you are speaking to someone who understands 100%. But I do like how your career has, it feels like you have been platform agnostic. And like you said, if an opportunity comes, you're a storyteller. And I think it's incredible how you have embraced all of these different mediums when opportunity comes, or because that's the best way to tell the story. And so I think that your career is one that a lot of people can learn from, not to pigeonhole yourself, not to pin yourself on like, oh, I only do audio storytelling, or I'm just a writer, I just do books. Because I think that's the beautiful thing about having these different opportunities and these different technologies to a certain extent, of saying, or I think it's more of the access is easier now, to be able to say, I want to do audio storytelling, and you don't have to necessarily get a deal with the 3 radio stations or something. You can create an audio production and or some sort of hybrid product or something like that. But putting the story first and figuring out how the story wants to be told. I think that's exciting. I want to talk about your memoir, Surviving the White Gaze, which came out, what year did that come out? 2021. So I'm a big lover of memoir, and I know you, but I don't know you deeply. I did not know your story. So when I read the book, I wouldn't say shocked, but there were things about it that you were very honest, to the point where, if for people who don't know your story, you were adopted by a white couple. You lived in a very white New Hampshire, small town, and you basically unfolded the whole story of your childhood upbringing. And I wanted to ask this question because so many of my students, and I know people listening, when they think about memoir, they struggle with this idea of being honest because they're going to hurt the people in their lives. Or if I had $1 for every time somebody said, I can't write my memoir until my mom dies, I got to wait for everybody to be dead before I can publish my truth. Can you talk a little bit about, what were your thoughts about, this is my story and I get to tell it the way I want to tell it? Or what was your thought process in sharing your story in the way you did?
I waited a long ass time. I was 50 years old when the memoir came out. Well, I waited until I was 50 to write it, is what I want to say. And I waited until I was good and grown, till I was a mother, which for me, and anybody who's listening who knows anybody or who is adopted or has adjacency to the adoptee experience, if you are an adoptee, having a child of your flesh, of your body, is a mind-blowing experience. It grounded me and changed me in ways that nothing ever has. So when I became a mother, when I became grown, when I became, as I said earlier, established my voice as a writer, finally, because I worked for several years as an editor and would write personal essays or pieces or whatever that would get published, and then increasingly got published. But that year plus as a Guardian columnist writing about race and Blackness in America really set the ground for the memoir. There was this ferocity of knowing it was time. Because what I realized in parenting my child is that he was so much more cognizant of what was going on in the country in terms of race than my parents and the world in which I was raised, which made me so mad, but also so grateful. And it was allowed me to reflect on what I didn't know and what I knew and what the trauma was, both around the adoption, but also around the deprivation of Blackness and Black community, and really how difficult the journey was to get to a place where I felt whole and that I had survived that gaze, that default whiteness, because that shit is very, very fucking serious. The internalization of white supremacy is absolutely wild. And it's wild in America writ large, but it's specifically wild when you are a Black adoptee in a white family, because these folks are well-meaning, which is the worst. The worst thing for a white parent to be well-meaning. Okay, so in terms of, I've heard that a million times too, of people saying, I've got to wait until for everybody to die. Then you have to wait until everybody, for everybody to die. But I will say that if you are writing particularly memoir and you're thinking about what other people are thinking, you're not going to write an honest memoir. You can only write it until you're not thinking what other people are saying. Now, that doesn't mean there's going to be fallout, because there was, and I experienced major fallout. And I don't even think of it in terms, well, was it worth it? It's not even about whether it's worth it. It's about, this is my truth. And it's very clear to me what that means and meant to my adoptive family. Everybody who I wrote about, that's really the kind of funny / not funny thing about it, is that everybody, particularly my parents, but my family, responded the way that I wrote them, right? They responded in the way that I characterized them, which has it's affirming, but it's also, that is what it is, and it's hard. It's hard both to write it, because it's a story. And, some of the best memoirists will tell you that it's not about embellishing. It's about finding the words that tell your truth in a way that is melodic and lyrical and literary. And so sometimes that can make you second guess your truth. But in fact, you're being a writer telling your truth.
Well, I thought it was a beautiful memoir. I fully got caught up in the story, but there's always that writer in me who's like paying attention to the craft, if you will. Your voice came through so well, and I felt like you told a very complicated story with a lot of grace and compassion, even for these people who could have been seen as not monsters, but
well,
there were some things.
Might be one
that you're like, oh my God. Yeah. But there was it never felt like vindictive or angry or anything, which is the true talent of the writer who can, like you said, tell this true story. Because nobody wants, even if it's fiction, nobody wants a super villain, and super angels, right? Nobody wants that. That's not interesting. And so I feel like you did such a good job of crafting your characters with nuance, even though they were real people, and yourself included.
Well, real people have nuance.
Right.
That's the thing. But I would also say, because you spoke earlier about compassion, you simply cannot write a memoir without radical compassion, like truly radical. And that means drafts upon drafts upon drafts, until you get to that place where it feels like this is honestly who this person was. And even though this person really hurt me or aided in my trauma or said something that will never leave me, that will never leave my body, they are still human. And there are reasons that we all do what we do. And again, you just have to find that place of empathy and feel the anger, outside of the page. There were many, many times where I would write a draft or write a chapter or write a sentence and feel, okay, that's good. And then leave it and just go for an angry run or something, or just be whatever you need to do, but make sure that what shows up on the page is empathetic and compassionate.
I think that's the best advice you can give to a memoirist, for sure. So let's jump to the red clay. First of all, before we go any further, what is the meaning of the title? I know what the red clay looks like. What does that mean? Where does that come from?
It comes from the red clay in Georgia. which is, sort of like the oldest, most rich soil in the country. And that's how I feel about Black women.
I love that. Okay. So, Rebecca, I am like salivating at wondering what was it like to be a 21-year-old saying, I wonder if Pearl Cleage, Lorraine Carey, like these amazing writers would sit for an interview with me. They said yes. What was that like? And what was the original like impetus for the original version of the book? What were you setting out to do? And literally, like, where did you get the chutzpah to like say, I could do this?
I think one thing that I truly believe and that has become very clear time and time again is that Black women find each other. I mean, just the fact that you and I are talking and that you reached out, it's like we find each other. It's almost like a higher calling. And so when I was at Hampshire, what I wanted to do was talk to Black women and talk to Black women writers. And so, we do at Hampshire College this, it's based on divisions. It's kind of a complicated but simple at the same time system, but you graduate with the Division 3 thesis. It's like a thesis. And so what I had outlined to my chair is I'm going to interview Black women writers on their craft and on gender and race. This is pre-Kimberly Crenshaw, like intersectionality, but that was basically the through line. And he was like, okay. And so I aimed really high and wrote letters. Remember, this is the time of letter writing. And so because the pool was so small, I ended up talking to Fran White. She taught at Hampshire, Black woman. And then this woman that I met who does appear in the original book, Davida Adejima, who I met at a conference for Black expats, Black expat writers. Anyway, so it was just 4 interviews. And I did this technique that was sort of like oral tradition, also sort of Studs Terkel, and then also Black women writers at work, Claudia Tate's book. Those are sort of the references where I did the interviews and then I took my questions out so that it was just a seamless narrative. And so when I presented that to my chair, he was like, this is really good. And I was like, yay, because that's what I had sort of set out to do. And I had always hoped that it would be a book. So the summer after I graduated, 3 Black women writers were on the New York Times bestseller list. Toni Morrison for jazz, Alice Walker, Possessing the Secret of Joy, and Terry McMillan, Waiting to Exhale. And I thought, this is a first, has to be a first, which it was, and also divine intervention for my purposes. And so I had this Division 3. I had this piece that I had submitted as my final work in college, and I sent it to a literary agent who was the agent of my father, who is a naturalist writer. It wasn't the best fit, but it was also, a literary agent is going to agent. And so she saw the potential and sold it almost immediately. And it was like, Lord, the advance was like $5,000. And I thought, oh my God. It was such a big deal. I mean, I was still waitressing, but I was going to publish a book. And so then I had to get the real names, right? Because I just had these 4 sort of unknowns. But the agent really loved the format. She thought that had some potential. And so, I started writing letters. Of course, the first was Toni. Nope. Then I wrote to Audra Lorde, who was very, very sick at the time and died soon after I had written to her. Alice, nope. A series, of rejections. And then Rita Dove said yes. And Nikki Giovanni said yes. And June Jordan said yes. And Lorraine Carey said yes. And it was crazy. It was so exciting. And I think, when you ask about the chutzpah, it felt like a kind of a higher calling, which is not to say that when we actually did the interviews, I had my shit together the whole time. It was daunting. Rita Dove is regal. And June is just a badass, or was. And I've always, at that time was still like trying to walk in my identity in a way that I wasn't prepared to do. But I think they knew that. And I think that there was the sense of encouraging me to stay the course. This is the right direction. You've made a good choice. That served me and really served as the foundation for my entire career.
That's so powerful. It's so powerful. It's literally like you had these literary fairy godmothers shepherding you on your path. It feels magical. I mean, I'm literally getting hairs on my neck. So, how did the book do? What happened when it was published, and who published it originally?
It was Random House, which had an imprint at the time called Clarkson and Potter, but it was Random House. And my editor was a young blonde white woman. And that was tough. It was tough because, again, I came from these voices and these conversations and then handed them to this young white woman who she might have been maybe 5 or 6 years older than me. Like she wasn't, like a veteran in the industry. And I remember who I really wanted to talk to was Michelle Wallace, who wrote Myth of a Superwoman. And she was very ill at the time and was really struggling. And we had this very, very intense conversation, which I loved, but it wasn't bright. It was a little dark. And this white editor just rejected it. Full stop. It's too depressing. And I just remember that will never leave me because Michelle took this time to talk with me and to share what she was going through. And I think Black women and mental illness and our health and our, we are disproportionately prone to everything. But when it comes to health, I think our stories don't get heard enough. And so that was an unpleasant part of the process. And publishing was so different then too. And nobody would have thought anything of the fact that I had a white editor because they were all white editors. All the publishers were white. And the maturity and the insight that I have now, I look back at that and think both, if I had the information I have now, she would have heard a different response. But, I was young and it was my first book and I trusted that she was trying to sell a book, right?
And so did you go on book tour? Did it get a lot of response from, I don't know, Black women writers, students? How was it received in the world? And I don't mean like sales. I just mean like, how was it received?
It was so hard to tell then because there was no social media. It was reviewed in Kirkus. I think it was reviewed in Publishers Weekly. I did a very sort of modest book tour, which was great fun. I was working as a receptionist at the Department of Afro-American Studies at Harvard. And so Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, was very supportive and blurbed it, and that was helpful. But I think largely a lot of folks saw it as an academic book, which it isn't to me. But I think people did and didn't know quite where to put it. And, collections of interviews, it's a hard sell because what are we really doing here? And particularly given the sort of platitudes of publishing and it's either this or it's this or it's this. But I would say that I did well enough to get a second book deal, which was a companion volume with Black men writers.
So I want to jump now to today. What was the impetus and what was the path like to get it reissued? And for those who are listening who might not know, it's very hard to get a book reissued, especially if it wasn't a bestseller. If it didn't make us money then, why would we do it now? It's publishing is a business. And so that's why I'm so excited that this is getting a second life because it's not very common. You have to have something special. So tell us what the path was for you to get it reissued.
Well, for one, Haymarket is a small but reputable publishing house. Random House or Simon & Schuster, who published my memoir, would likely never reissue this book. And I think that smaller houses like that have a real sense of longevity, of real readers, and also the zeitgeist. Small houses have, and it seems sort of ironic, but more sense of the zeitgeist than the bigger ones, because the bigger ones want to just get stuff out fast and sell things fast. But the real meaning, to my mind, of the zeitgeist is something that really penetrates culture. And, the impact of Black women in this country is forever the zeitgeist. We show up and have showed up for this country in ways that nobody else have. And I say country because I know you're in Spain, I mean America. But the way that we show up for each other is absolutely unparalleled. And I think given particularly now, we didn't know when this was commissioned, even that Kamala Harris would run. But somehow, you know what I'm saying? There was a sensibility, there was a sense that this would be incredibly relevant because it's timeless. Black women telling stories and showing up for each other is timeless and regenerative. And so in this moment where we could have had the first Black woman president in America, but instead we got a white supremacist and a convicted felon, and Black women, always the strongest, biggest voting bloc for democracy, are tired. There's all of these op-eds, and I wasn't going to pile on, right? Of we're tired. We're going to take a rest and so on and so forth. But what I would like to offer is that we just find each other as we do, regenerate, and then keep it pushing.
That's why I think this book it's just, I can't wait to get my hands on it. It feels like it will be my book of Psalms.
Oh, I love that. So
did you pitch to Haymarket or did Haymarket come to you?
On Twix, I like to call it Twix now, Twitter and X. Like a year or two ago, I don't know. A lot of folks that I like, authors that I admire, have published with Haymarket. And I think they had put out the reissued Black Women at Work.
They did, yeah.
And so I DM'd Katie O'Donnell, a senior editor at Haymarket, and I said, I have a book that is meaningful and I would love a conversation if you would entertain a conversation about reissuing it. And she responded right away, and I sent her the book and she said, this is amazing, let's do it. I mean, it really was like that.
Oh God, you hear that, everybody? Everybody listening? It can be like that it's got to be an alignment, but it can happen like that. Publishing is about relationships and knowing the right people for the book that you want to do.
Can I also just quickly add that for your listeners, that it can be like that, but it can also be, I could have just as easily gotten a rejection. And so what I want to say around that is, as writers, we have the opportunity to define success in a very, very success-oriented culture. And that's, I think, global, really. But that also means that if it isn't in alignment, and I'm so glad you said that, then it isn't. And that's a reality as well. But being writers allows us to create connection, to create a network, to believe in the stories that are important, and to, I'm not a huge manifester. Like, I feel like that is a fraught term. But I do also think that as writers, that's sort of what we do all the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that 100%. So I think also, like, along those same lines, what you just said, it kind of speaks to how you took the original Red Clay and you didn't just reissue it, you upgraded it. You gave it a glow up. Like, you did you added something to it and made it more relevant for the moment we're in that you brought in new writers, which I thought was such a brilliant way to do this, because it's not like you can re-interview them. I mean, maybe you could, some of them aren't still living. But the idea of having contemporary writers who have a connection to the original interviewees, it's like icing on an already delicious cake. Tell me a little bit about where that idea came from, because again, we had reissuing of Black Women at Work. We didn't really get any kind of new information. And I think maybe there's a new foreword or maybe a new intro, which is what people do, right? A new foreword, a new introduction. But it's like you reinvigorated the original text. So talk about what made you think of that.
So it was so magical to me. I mean, it came to me sort of immediately, because that's what I do also, though. I mean, I have mentored tons of young Black women writers. I have published and edited in my magazine work a lot of young Black women writers. And it just felt like such a beautiful opportunity. I love intergenerational pieces that sort of feel like a thread, a connectivity, a portrait narrative, a quilt. It's like quilting and collaging. And so, I had a list of writers that came to mind. And what was the most amazing to me, and this again speaks to alignment, is the way in which I reached out to certain folks. And sometimes I had in mind who I might want them to introduce, and sometimes I just said, who would you like to introduce? So for example, I reached out to Basi Ikpi, the best-selling author of I'm Lying, But I'm Telling the Truth. She's a brilliant writer. And she said, "Oh my God, J. California Cooper changed my life. She is the reason I write the way I write. Please let me do her," which was magical. And then, I reached out to Safiya Sinclair and said, "Would you be interested in introducing Rita Dove?" without knowing that she had been Rita's student. So when I asked her to do that, she said, "Are you kidding?" Then I emailed Rita about it, and she was just so moved and referred to her as my wondrous student. Like, that's the kind of stuff that was really meant to be. And I reached out to Jay Wortham, and she said, "Is June Jordan available?" And of course, who better than to write about June Jordan than Jay Wortham, So these connections were so divine and so fun and so moving, really, truly moving. And I think as a piece, it's just really beautiful.
So this is like the question that you should never ask a mother, like, which is your favorite kid? I'm going to ask you, like, do you have a preference for which version is your, like, do you like one version better? Or do you not want to answer that question? You don't have to.
No, I don't mind answering that. I like them differently. I, as a fairly self-critical person, the introduction in the first version to me feels kind of stilted because I was still figuring it out, 21 years old. But it also, again, it is the foundation. It is the ancestral foundation of my career. The current version it represents all of the things that I hold dear. It is the ability to find each other, but also to create language, as Tony would say. We die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language, that is the measure. Right? So doing language in this incredibly powerful gathering. And, I think also thinking about myself as a 20-year-old, but also myself as a girl, a young Black girl in this all white town. This is a gift to her. It's for her to have and hold.
All right. So we're going to jump now into our, what I call craft talk time, where I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about your practice as a writer. Here we go. So when you write, do you have any particular rituals or special things that you do, wear, eat, set up to get you into the writing zone?
Well, I usually wait. If it's deadline oriented, I usually wait until the last minute because then I don't spend too much time worrying about it. And I know it has to get done. Usually, if I spend a lot of time trying to think about what I want to write, I just belabor it, and it just feels like I'm not going to be able to say what I want to say because I can overthink very easily. And so for me, the quickest route to a deadline or a piece of good writing for me is to not overthink it. And I always know when I'm ready to do it. Like, so that say the deadline is Monday at noon and it's Sunday at 11 a.m. I'm like, okay, it's about time. And I'll sit down and I'll write it because I have to, and because I know that I haven't overthought it. I write at the kitchen table in every apartment, in every house, in everywhere I've ever lived. I write at the kitchen table. Desks have never, ever worked for me in terms of creativity. And I usually write straight through. If it's 1,000 words, I'd sit down and write the whole, which is not to say it won't be revised because, you got to do the revision. But when I was writing the memoir, I had a very, very serious practice. I took a leave from WMIC, a 3-month leave, and I, would get up and bring my kid to school. Then I would come home, have some coffee, read, and then I would write for 2 or 3 hours. And then I got into this ritual of treating myself with creating a delicious meal. Like I had the time to cook. So I started like ordering cookbooks, like the Ottolenghi cookbook and all of these other, like from Middle Eastern food and Ghanaian food and all these kinds of different cookbooks. And so then I would choose a recipe. And then because I live in Brooklyn, in New York City, I would drive to get the ingredients. Like that was my special treat to myself after writing, is that I would find a beautiful recipe, I would write the list of ingredients, and then I would drive to wherever the specialty store was to get those ingredients. Then I would come home and make the meal.
I think I was following you on social media. Did you not post about a lot of those cooking?
I did. I did.
I remember like, dang, she makes some exciting things. But I love
Yeah.
that. And that really speaks this is read, write, and create. And it really speaks to what I always tell my writers is like, you need to have other creative outlets. Like you need to express your creativity. And I think cooking is a great way to do that. It's very tactile. It's very sensual. You get to eat when you're done, but like it's a great another thing to do. Any snacks? Do you do any snacking while you're eating? Is there anything that you like to use? Never. That was very quick. Never. How come?
Just distracting. And also I like to, which speaks to what I just said, like I like to, I'm into like committed eating. Like I really like to have that be what I'm doing. Like I've never really been a snacker. Like if I'm, watching a movie or whatever, not really. I mean, even at the theater, not really.
So interesting. Okay. Last question really is just, what are you working on now? And is it something you can talk about and share with us? Or is it still in that secretive, I'm not sure I want to tell anybody about it yet?
I feel both ways, but also because I'm trying to break out a little bit of like superstition, like not sharing something with someone because maybe it won't come to fruition. So I am working on an idea for a book about friendship and friendships for a variety of reasons, but mainly because when I wrote the memoir, I talked a lot about the way in which white supremacy had been internalized and standards of beauty had been internalized in terms of romantic relationships, but not when it came to my friendships with white women. And a lot of my friendships with white women didn't survive that book, that did not survive that memoir. And now with the re-election of Trump, it reminded me of that whole wave of the first time when white girlfriends would email to tell me that they're reading Robin DiAngelo or How to Be an Anti-Racist, and just sort of thinking about what it means to have, because a lot of my white girlfriends are friends that I made when I was a kid, because there weren't any other folks, right? At a time when I believed that they were more beautiful by virtue of the fact that they were white. And what does it mean to be in a friendship, or how do you continue a friendship with someone who allowed you to believe that? I mean, that's sort of one part of it, but then the other part of it is the way in which my Black women friendships have nurtured me in a way that is unparalleled. And I think just the examination of friendship, if for no other reason than for me to figure it out, a lot of Black women will say, absolutely not with white women. And I get that, but it's not my fault that I was raised in a white family and that all the people who were available to me as friends were white. That's just sort of, the very, very vague premise of where I might go with this.
I hope you keep exploring that, because I think I've seen, I can't even tell you the title, but I have, heard these conversations about how important friendship is, and yet we don't give it anywhere near the amount of attention that we do romantic relationships.
I think that is definitely in the modern contemporary conversation, like there's definitely a lot more around that. In fact, well, let me stop. But I reference a podcast conversation about just that in the proposal. And so.
Was it the Trevor Noah one?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. That's where I heard this conversation, and it just made me think so much about how, whatever it does. I think it's a great idea, Rebecca, and I hope you continue with that thought, and I hope it turns into something delicious.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, I know you already said that social media is not your best friend, but where do you like to play on the interwebs? Are you still on Twix? Have you moved on? Like, what are you doing?
I am on a lot of things, and I wouldn't say that it's not my best friend. I just don't have it for like the TikToks. I can't do it with the videos. I only recently learned how to do Canva. You know what I mean? Like, but I definitely am on IG. I'm definitely on, there's a whole bunch of us, particularly writers. Maybe that's because that's my network, but a whole bunch of us have gone back to Facebook and, are very active on that. I'm on Blue Sky. But I don't know. It's hard to differentiate. Like, what are we doing on these what's different about Blue Sky that's different? So I would say primarily I'm on Instagram.
Great. And what's your handle? We'll put it in the show notes, but just to tell people.
It's Rebel June Marie.
Rebel June Marie.
Yes, RebelJuneMarie.
All right, we will put that in the show notes. And we are all, of course, going to buy a copy of I Know What the Red Clay Looks Like for ourselves for a holiday gift, and one for our bestie. So thank you so much for doing the work to bring it back into the world, new and improved. And we wish you the best of luck and happy whatever you celebrate in December.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Rebecca Carroll and that it left you feeling more motivated and inspired to write. I also hope you pick up a copy of I Know What the Red Clay Looks Like for yourself and maybe one for your favorite writing bestie. Now, if you'd like to win a free copy of the book and you live in the United States, leave a comment that says Red Clay on the Read, Write, and Create Instagram page on the post for this episode. Everyone who posts by December 18th, 2024 will be entered to win a free signed copy of the book. We will be awarding one copy to one lucky winner. Thank you for listening to this award-winning podcast. Even though I know you people don't seem to like writing reviews on podcast platforms, and yes, I said it, you people. I still love you anyway, though, just because you won't write me a review. I don't mind. Why? Because enough of you have emailed me and DM'd me to tell me how much you enjoy this podcast and that it's really helping you stay motivated to keep writing. And that keeps me motivated to keep making more episodes. That being said, your girl is tired. So this will be the last episode of season 4 of the podcast. I will be taking my annual holiday break, and then we will be back in early 2025 with new episodes to enhance your literary life. But in the meantime, if you still want more creative writing inspiration and useful resources for your literary life, then be sure to check out the Read, Write, Create website at readwriteandcreate.com. That's at read, R-E-E-D, writeandcreate.com. And while you're there, you will notice that we now have the Read, Write, Create shop where you can find t-shirts and sweatshirts and tote bags. You can also sign up for the Read, Write, and Create newsletter, and you can find links to all of our content on Instagram and Pinterest and my new YouTube channel at Literary Lori. Whatever you do between now and 2025, I hope it is infused with joy and the smell of new books. The Read, Write, and Create podcast is written and produced by me, Lori L. Tharps. Our editor is Brad Linder, and our theme music is by Wataboy. Until next year, scribes, keep writing. The world needs more BIPOC stories written by BIPOC storytellers just like you.